sink or swim. Now, I recently did a video talking about a guy who blew the gig, a guy who wasn't ready to play, didn't know the songs, and showed up on what is a typical Nashville style corporate gig. He wasn't prepared, right? But I have people in the comments who say, "Oh, you can't have an unrehearsed band. That's a disaster waiting to happen." Well, I'm here to tell you that unrehearsed bands are largely what you're seeing in Nashville, whether it's corporate gigs or downtown on Lower Broadway or in the jazz clubs. Here's the reality. Musicians are working so much, they do not have time to rehearse. Here is the reality. You don't get paid to rehearse either. Okay, so I had a guy in the comments, and I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but he said basically something to the effect of, "Well, you play just about on the same level as me, and I would never play a gig unrehearsed, and that's just setting yourself up for failure." Okay, this guy could be eons above me in playing ability, but maybe unaware because he's out in California. And, I spent the last 30 years in Nashville, right? Totally different scene. When I was out in California, I had my Sunset Strip band, and every now and then I would do somebody's showcase or something like that. And all of those things were rehearsed, right? Those were set song lists. Here's the songs we're going to play. We're going to practice our show. We're going to go and play 45 minutes. Here's what we're going to do. And we rehearse it over and over again. And I did that for years while I was out in LA. We would rehearse 4 to 5 times a week for 2 or 3 hours a day, right? And I understand that whole thing, that whole thing of let's rehearse and do all that. But when I came to Nashville, and one of the first gigs that I did, I can remember getting hired to go play my first gig. And I went over, Reggie Wooten got me on the gig, and I said, "Reggie, what are we going to play?" He said, "Oh man, we're just going to play some songs, man. You be good. I said, "Hey man, can I come over and you go over some things?" I wasn't prepared for Nashville yet, coming from LA. Just like these guys in the comments saying, they need to rehearse and all that. If you would let that stop you, then you wouldn't be able to make it in Nashville. You would turn down those gigs. And look, man, it happens on all levels. It's nothing to get a call, an emergency last minute call to fill in on a road gig, and there's no rehearsal. You might get to run a couple songs at sound check, and you're going right out there on an arena stage playing a show in front of 15,000 people with no rehearsal. But it starts with the first gig. When you get to Nashville, you get a call or somebody plugs you into a gig. And like I said, I went over to Reggie's, house, his house, and I went up there with my guitar and a notebook. I said, "What are we going to play?" And he starts reeling off some of the Nashville R&B jazz type gig tunes that people play. "Oh, well, we'll probably play Mr. Magic." And so, I made a couple notes. We'll probably play, My Girl. We'll probably play What You Won't Do for Love. We'll probably play. And so I scribbled down quick notes. He spat out some chord changes and all. He said, "But man, you be good. Man, you good." And, so I left there with a handful of, just a few scribbled notes on a notepad after spending about maybe an hour over there, not playing songs in full, not rehearsing things, because here's the other reality. Most of these gigs have no set list. You're basically they're going in and judging the audience. The top gigs, there are show bands in Nashville that are rehearsed, and they have rehearsed dance moves, and they have backing tracks, and everything's on a click and all that. That's a whole nother subject, and I've covered sort of that end of the spectrum in other videos. But man, getting a last minute call for that, they'll probably give you a tape. You'll have to learn the tape very, very quickly and then go play the gig. But here's the deal, man. The level of musicianship in Nashville, right? And look, not all guys are on the same level. The other thing is, if you're the band leader on those type of gigs where it's thrown together, you're hoping that each guy in the band and have worked with them. While the band might not rehearse, collectively, you may have played dozens, you may have played hundreds of gigs. There were band leaders in Nashville that I literally played hundreds of gigs for. And every now and then, you'll have a new guy on drums, or you'll have a new guy on bass, or saxophone, or whatever. And it is not rehearsed. These guys are usually vetted. They're usually somebody recommends a guy. Hey, I got this drummer, man. If you need a drummer, he's great. He knows a lot of tunes. All of this stuff happens, right? And here's the deal. The keyboard player, band leader, may be playing 5 nights a week. He doesn't want to have to rehearse with some new guy playing My Girl and Mr. Magic and, Al Green songs and all this stuff that he should already know. He should already be able to play those songs, blend with the band. And look, the guy in the comments, he could say, well, I can play everything you can play, or I'm a little bit better player than I am. But are you a better listener? Because the number one thing you have to do with a thrown together band is listen. You don't come out the gate just filling every hole. If there's a keyboard player and you're a guitar player, you've got to listen to what he's doing. How much is he playing? Is he playing both hands on the keyboard, thick voicings? Or is he just playing the set part in the song? Or is this guy playing all kinds of chord subs where you have to play a guessing game what chord he's going to play next? So while you can judge my playing and go, well, you're not that great, man, you unrehearsed gig, oh man, that's a train wreck. Man, you don't have any idea. When I've done literally probably 1,000 unrehearsed gigs, and songs get called. I've even had instances where a song gets called and I've never even heard it, right? Now, something that I learned later in my time in Nashville, because I'm not talking about a 3-chord country song. I'm talking about some random Stevie Wonder song or some, Michael Jackson tune with tons of chord changes in it. And the song would get called and I would quickly pull up a chart on iReel and I'd have to sight read the chord changes, the whole time. Basically reading a chord chart, not reading the individual notes of the chords, but reading and playing along with a chord chart. So And again, even with that chord chart, you have to listen because it might not be right. It might have some wrong chords in there. And if I just headstrong plow through what's written and the keyboard player's playing substitute chord changes, I have to be able to listen and adjust. And look, man, playing these gigs, sometimes I would be the band leader and I'd be handed, here's the players you have on the gig. Some of them I may know. Some of them I might prefer over others. And then again, there could be unknown entities. Remember walking into a gig with a keyboard player who I'd never played with before. I'm the band leader, and we have to play 4 hours straight. And I've got an unknown entity on keyboards. So I already know I've got a tough job ahead of me. But my job as band leader in this unrehearsed band, everybody else in the band I had were ringers. Everybody else I had collectively played at least 100 gigs with, right? And playing these same songs, right? But I walk in, new keyboard player's even late, running late to the venue, but he gets there. And I find out on the gig that this guy can play anything I throw at him. So boom, bonus plan. But I have been in situations where a guy is an unknown entity on the gig. Somebody recommends him and it's not there. It's not there. And, there's a lot of different ways you can handle that. But, here's the deal, man. When people are gigging 4-5 days a week, and that is money, right? That is money. You don't get paid to rehearse. There's no budget for rehearsals, right? So if you have to rehearse, you may have to rent a rehearsal space. If you're going to have a 10 or 12 piece band and you want to rehearse them, you can't rehearse a 10 or 12 piece band in your garage or in your living room. You won't be able to hear everything. What you do and what they do in Nashville is these band leaders have a deep list of players, these band managers that manage these type of corporate type gigs that I was doing, that I was specifically talking about in this video. And you could throw different combinations together. There might be 3 bands out in one night with the same band name under the same band manager umbrella with different combinations of players. And they will specifically go, okay, your gig, I'm going to give you this singer. And I go, great. I like working with this singer. I know all their songs. And we're going to give you this unknown entity, male vocal, but you won't really need them because your female is super strong. And then they might take the first call male vocal might be on the other gig. And maybe that other gig has a third call female vocalist. And maybe you get the bass player that knows every song. And maybe you get a keyboard player that you haven't worked with as much, but is solid, right? And look, this back in the day, this was called a casual. They would call these casuals up and down the East Coast. You would get plugged into these gigs. You're working with pros. And back in those days, you would all be playing songs out of the real book with some classic Motown and stuff like that thrown in. And you were expected to be able to get together with 4 or 5 or 10 or 12 or 13 competent musicians and play music together and make it sound good with no rehearsal. And I can speak honestly when I say 90% of the time we slayed, we crushed. It wasn't a sloppy mess that the average musician with some thrown together guys is going to come out with. No, these are trained cadres. These are guys that can deliver the goods on anything at a moment's notice, right? And it's the job of the band leader to make it cohesive, to call the right songs. No, we're not going to call songs that people in the band don't know. No, we're not going to call things that aren't going to sound good. So it doesn't always lend itself to taking song choice, bringing in new material at the last minute. That's never a great consideration. But what it does mean is there's a list of about probably 100 songs that everybody needs to know. If you're doing that type of work, there's the same kind of list for guys that are playing lower Broadway and having to play and getting plugged into bands down there. What do you think happens when your guitar player gets in an accident, the morning of your gig on lower Broadway, and they've got to get somebody else in there? Oh no, well, we're going to rehearse. We got to get a guy and rehearse real quick. There is no time for that. And look, of course, there are times where it just doesn't work. There are nights where it's tough. But when you have high standards, right, you're always going to judge your performance. I never walk away from a gig going, man, I really kicked ass tonight. No, man, you deliver a consistent level of great. Consistent level of great every night. That's what you're expected to do. That's what you're paid to do. That's why you're on the gig. Your gear works. You know the songs. You show up with a good attitude. And then you're working with guys that are doing the same thing. They are professionals. They're not guys that go, wait, I didn't rehearse that. These are guys that can deliver on the spot. And they are able to improvise on the spot. A band that rehearses can't all of a sudden, hey, this isn't working. We need to play a different genre of music. Man, there are many times when you get to a gig and you look out in the audience and go, this isn't our normal type of audience. We're going to have to pull music from a different decade. This audience is older, so we're going to have to play a lot of music from the 50s and 60s. Or this audience is younger, so we're going to have to bring a lot of energy. And even if we stick to our older stuff, we've got to elevate, and we've got to really bring the heat. And man, this can be hard for people to imagine that an unrehearsed band can sound great. But I assure you, everyone watching this video, that I've seen it happen time and time again, more times than not. So if you have to rehearse to make your band sound good, and ask yourself why. If you've played hundreds and hundreds of gigs and you're still having to do 2 or 3 unpaid rehearsals during the week, you got to question yourself, man. Because in Nashville and in whether you're playing casuals up on the East Coast or any of that, it's nothing for a bunch of competent musicians get together and have a great gig.